The river is never quiet. You learn that on your first night. The Rhine moves in the dark, black water, cold as iron, and across it, somewhere in the trees, something that is not an animal watches the torchlight on your side of the bank. You are 22 years old. You have signed away the next 25 years of your life. And the man standing next to you on the rampart, who has been here 11 years already, does not look at the far bank anymore. He says that is how you know you have been here too long. You stop looking. It is autumn, 83 AD. The fort is called Castra Vetera, or rather, what remains of it after the Batavian revolt a decade before burned the original to the ground. The Romans rebuilt, as Romans do. Timber and earth first, then stone. You are stationed somewhere along the lower Rhine, in the province of Germania Inferior, which is not really a province so much as a promise Rome keeps making to itself. You are not Roman. That is the first thing to understand about your life. You are Batavian from the island the Romans call Insula Batavorum, the flat wet land where the Rhine splits into two mouths before it dies in the North Sea. Your people have a deal with Rome that goes back 4 generations. You give them soldiers, they give you a measure of autonomy. You ride. You swim in armor, your tribe is famous for it. The legions bring the siege engines and the eagles. You bring the men who cross rivers in the dark. Your auxiliary cohort is one of the cohorts Batavorum, 9 of which are documented in Roman military records as elite units. You are paid less than a legionary. You are not a citizen, but you carry a Roman sword, you sleep inside Roman walls, and when the century commander shouts, you answer in Latin. You wake before dawn, not because you want to. The watch system runs in 4 shifts through the night, and your body has learned to surface from sleep the way a drowning man surfaces, fast, alert, already listening. The barracks block holds 8 men to a room, 2 rooms to contubernium, 1 for sleeping, 1 for kit. The smell is tallow candles, wet wool, and the smoke of a brazier that has been burning damp wood again. Your bunkmate Flavus, who is also Batavian and also not named Flavus, that is the Latin name they assigned him, is already awake, working a small crack in his scutum with a bone tool. Morning is the same every day, which is partly the point. You grind your own grain. This is documented. Roman soldiers were issued grain rations and expected to process them. The stone quern is shared between your 8-man unit, and whoever draws the short straw that week does the grinding before the century assembles. The bread you make is unleavened, dense, and you have eaten it so many times it has become indistinguishable from silence. Drills happen every morning, not because an enemy is coming, though one always might be, but because the Roman army understands something that no other army of this era fully grasps. A soldier who drills every day does not panic. The muscle remembers what the mind forgets. You have practiced the testudo formation so many times that you can lock shields in the dark without looking, the curved edges overlapping by exactly the right margin, the men around you pressing in, breathing together. It is almost like being trusted. Here is what the contract looks like from the inside. You enlisted at 17 or 18. The records show auxiliaries were recruited young, often the sons of men who had served before. Your father served. You grew up knowing this was coming the way a farmer's son knows the harvest is coming. Not a surprise, not entirely a choice. The term is 25 years. At the end of it, if you survive, you receive something extraordinary, Roman citizenship. For you and for any children born after your discharge, the diploma, a small bronze tablet in 2 sheets wired together, documenting your service and your new legal status. Dozens of these diplomas have been found archaeologically, real objects you can hold in a museum today. They are surprisingly small for something that changes everything. But 25 years is a long time to hold in your mind. You do not think about it that way. You think in terms of the campaigning season, which runs roughly from spring to autumn, and the winter quarters, which are when men gamble, drink the thin local beer, get sick, and write letters home that may or may not arrive. We have some of those letters, or versions of them. The Vindolanda tablets from a fort in northern Britain, just slightly later than your time, show Roman soldiers requesting warm socks, inviting each other to birthday parties, complaining about their commanding officers with a candor that crosses 2,000 years without losing anything. You miss your mother. This is not sentiment, it is logistics. She is the person who can confirm your identity if there is ever a dispute about your discharge. Rome is bureaucratic down to the bone. And then the emperor decides he needs a triumph. Domitian Titus Flavius Domitianus has been emperor since 81 AD. He is not loved by the Senate, which means the historians who come after him will not love him either. But in 83 AD, he does something real. He crosses the Rhine and wages war against the Chatti, a Germanic confederation to the east. The ancient sources, primarily Tacitus and Suetonius, disagree on what actually happened during this campaign, and it matters to understand that disagreement. Suetonius, who despised Domitian, wrote that the whole thing was a fraud, that Domitian bought Germanic slaves, dressed them up as prisoners of war, and paraded them through Rome in his triumph. Tacitus is more measured. The modern scholarly consensus, drawing on archaeological evidence including new Roman fortifications built after 83 AD, suggests the campaign was real and had real military results. The establishment of a new frontier line, the Taunus Limes, with watchtowers and roads that pushed Roman control further east than it had been before. What this means for you, you go. Auxiliaries cross first. Your unit, the cohors Batavorum, is exactly the kind of force Domitian uses for river crossings and advance reconnaissance. You have trained for this. Your body knows what to do. But knowing what to do and not being afraid are not the same thing, and anyone who tells you otherwise has never stood in shallow water in full armor while the far bank fills with the sound of Germanic war horns. The Chatti are not barbarians in any meaningful sense. They are organized, they build fortifications, they have been studying Roman tactics for 100 years. You know this. You have spoken to traders who cross back and forth. The enemy across the river is not a mystery. That, in some ways, is worse. Combat in this period is close, brutally, personally close. The Roman way of war is built around the gladius, a short stabbing sword, roughly 50 to 60 centimeters of iron, designed for the space between two men when there is almost no space. You have trained with it so many times that your right forearm is measurably thicker than your left. Archaeologists have found this in skeletal remains from Roman military contexts, asymmetric muscle development on the sword arm, where patterns on the teeth from holding straps during exertion. You are not in a legion phalanx. You are auxiliary. Your unit moves differently, faster, looser, used to exploit gaps and flanks and riverbanks that heavier infantry cannot reach. You are good at this. Being good at it has kept you alive for 4 years so far, which is not a guarantee of anything. The man next to you, not Flavius, someone else, a man from a different village on the Batavian island who you have trained beside for 2 years, goes down in the first real engagement of the campaign. Not dramatically. He steps wrong on wet ground, his footing fails for half a second, and that is enough. The gap that opens is filled before you can respond. You do not have time to feel this. The training is working exactly as intended. You feel it 3 days later at night, when the adrenaline has finally finished draining out of your body, and the quiet comes back, and you lie on hard ground in a marching camp that smells of wood smoke and blood and the turned earth of new latrines, and you think about what his name actually was, not the Latin one. Domitian's campaign ends with a frontier reorganized and a triumph celebrated in Rome in 83 AD. Whether that triumph was wholly earned is the argument historians still have. What is not in dispute? The Taunus Limes, that new line of forts and watchtowers, was built, and it stood for roughly a century and a half. You helped build some of it. Roman soldiers built their own infrastructure. This is documented. After the fighting, your unit digs drainage ditches and hauls timber for watchtower platforms. From conqueror to laborer in a week. The empire is not sentimental. You winter back at the Rhine. The years continue. The campaigning seasons blur. There is another operation in 85 AD, and then the Dacian crisis begins pulling Roman attention east toward the Danube, and the Rhine frontier becomes, for a stretch, almost quiet. Almost. You are 31 now. You have seen enough that you have become the man who does not look at the far bank anymore. You understand why. It is not indifference. It is a form of attention. You stop staring at what you cannot control and start watching what you can. The cracks in the fort wall, the mood of the sentry commander, the supply wagon that is 2 days late and what that might mean. The pay is modest. We know the rates. A Roman auxiliary in the 1st century AD earned roughly 5/6 of what a legionary earned, and from that pay were deducted the costs of food, equipment replacement, and burial club contributions. Yes, the army deducted money from your pay for your own funeral fund. The empire was always doing the accounting. The diploma arrives on a day that looks like every other day. A clerk, a table, 2 witnesses you have never met. Your commanding officer's name is on the document, and the emperor's name, by this point it may be Nerva or Trajan. The years are doing what years do, and your name, your actual name, the Batavian one, rendered in Latin letters that have never quite learned how to hold it. You are now a Roman citizen. So are your children, if you have any by this point, and you may. Roman soldiers were technically prohibited from legal marriage during service, but the relationships they formed with local women were widely documented, widely tolerated, and children born of those unions received citizenship at the father's discharge. The prohibition on marriage was formally lifted under Septimius Severus in 197 AD, which tells you how vigorously the earlier prohibition was being enforced. The bronze diploma is small enough to hold in one hand. It contains your entire claim on everything Rome promised you. You keep it somewhere dry. What does citizenship actually give you at 42 or 43 at the end of 25 years? The right to make a will under Roman law, the right to a legal marriage, the right to not be flogged. Citizens could not be subjected to corporal punishment that non-citizens could. The right, technically, to appeal to the emperor. None of these are trivial. All of them are things you could not do before. You settle near the fort. Most discharged auxiliaries did. The archaeological and documentary evidence shows veteran communities, Cannaby, growing up around permanent forts. You know the land. You know the river. The far bank has not changed. Neither, perhaps, have you, except that you have stopped being afraid of it, and you are no longer sure if that is wisdom or just the end of something. Your son enlists, of course he does. Here is the accounting, because there is always an accounting. The Roman military machine was, among other things, a financial instrument. Auxiliary soldiers provided Rome with military capacity at reduced cost. They were paid less than citizens, equipped partly at their own deducted expense, and rewarded with citizenship only after a quarter-century of service, by which point many were dead, and the citizenship passed instead to children who had grown up in the fort's shadow. The empire got the labor. The soldier got the promise. Whether the promise was kept depended entirely on whether you survived. And the men who didn't survive, their burial club funds were paid out, their equipment returned to the unit's store, their names entered in the unit's casualty records. The papyri that survived from Roman Egypt, the Oxyrhynchus papyri, the archive of Flavius Abinius, show us the meticulous Roman record-keeping that tracked all of this. Names, dates, causes. The empire remembered you precisely because it needed to know the slot was available. What remains of your life, specifically, your Batavian auxiliary life on the Rhine in 83 AD, is this: a diploma, if you were lucky enough to hold on to it, possibly a gravestone. Roman legionary and auxiliary gravestones have been found all along the Rhine, many of them bilingual, the Latin text sitting beside names that Latin could never quite absorb. Soldiers who commemorated themselves with their native iconography alongside Roman eagles. Men who were both things at once and spent 25 years learning what that costs. The river is still there. the same river. It does not look like a frontier anymore, which means it worked, or that what it was protecting became something different before anyone noticed. So here is the question I want to leave you with. Rome offered these men citizenship in exchange for a quarter-century of risk, loyal service, and a kind of deliberate erasure of who they were before. If you had been born on that island, with that deal in front of you, would you have signed?